Right at this moment, while you are reading these lines, something is happening that almost no one on Earth knows about. A machine the size of a small car is drifting in the darkness at a distance farther than any artificial object humanity has ever sent. It was built before the internet existed, before home computers existed. It operates with less power than a nightlight in your child's room. And this tiny, underpowered machine that was only intended to operate for 21 months has silently carried a mystery that could shake the foundations of modern physics. Scientists do not use words like interesting or surprising. They use words like shocking, incomprehensible, and Newton may not be complete. This is the story of Pioneer 10, and this is the part the headlines do not tell you. The machine died on January 23, 2003, before its biggest question was fully answered. The final solution in 2012 may have closed the door too early, and right now, the question is still flying silently through the darkness, with no one waiting for the answer. Stay with me, because by the time this story ends, you will understand why sometimes the final answer of science is not that we know, but that we have run out of ways to ask. Go back to the year 1980. Pioneer 10 had by then passed Jupiter 7 years earlier, was crossing the orbit of Saturn, heading out into the outer solar system, farther than any spacecraft humanity had ever sent. At the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California, a scientist named John the 500th, Anderson was doing the work he had done every day for nearly a decade. He was tracking Pioneer 10 and its sister ship Pioneer 11 through radio Doppler signals. If you are not familiar with this concept, then think of the sound of an ambulance siren. When the vehicle is coming toward you, the sound is higher. When the vehicle is going away, the sound drops lower. That is the Doppler shift. JPL uses exactly that principle with radio waves to measure the position of spacecraft with accuracy down to the meter over distances of billions of kilometers. This is the most precise navigation tool humans have ever had. But on one day in 1980, Anderson noticed something so small it seemed meaningless. The radio frequency returning from Pioneer 10 did not match the calculations. Not by much. Only a few hundred miles of discrepancy per year over a total distance of billions of kilometers. But it was consistent. It did not go away, and it also appeared in Pioneer 11. Anderson could have published right away. He could have written a paper, held a press conference, and become the discoverer of the most important physics anomaly of the late 20th century. He did not. He kept the anomaly in a drawer for 18 years. Imagine this. For nearly 2 decades, every night a scientist sat checking and rechecking a number that no one else knew about. No paper written, no word to colleagues, no hint to students. Just running the calculations again, night after night, trying to prove himself wrong. He eliminated every ordinary explanation a navigator might think of. Was residual fuel in the lines leaking and creating a small thrust? No, the calculations did not match. Was it an error in the ground measuring equipment? No, all 3 Deep Space Network stations gave the same result. Was it the drag of interplanetary dust slowing the craft? No, the dust density out there was far too low. Was it the gravitational pull of distant planets not calculated correctly? No, Anderson had tried every model. None matched. And Pioneer 11, the sister ship, launched 1 year after Pioneer 10, flying in a nearly opposite direction past Saturn, showed a similar anomaly. Same magnitude, same direction. 2 machines going in opposite directions, being pulled toward the same point by the same force that no one could name. Think about that. Anderson thought about it for 18 years. He did not publish until 1998. This is where the story shifts from a navigation peculiarity into a physics crisis. In 1998, after 18 years of silence, Anderson and his team published a paper in Physical Review Letters, one of the most prestigious journals a physicist could dream of. And that paper was not about a spacecraft. It was about Newton. Isaac Newton's law of universal gravitation had stood for 311 years. Ever since Newton wrote it in the Principia in 1687, no one in the history of science had ever seen it fail at the scale of the solar system. Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 followed Newton to the point that every meter could be predicted. Cassini flew to Saturn, threaded between the rings, and landed a probe on the moon Titan, all by Newton's equations. Galileo went to Jupiter, dropped a probe into Jupiter's atmosphere at a coordinate calculated years in advance by Newton. New Horizons flew past Pluto with an error of less than 100 kilometers after 9 years of flight by Newton. Newton is the most precise mathematics humanity has ever had. Precise enough that spacecraft are navigated across billions of kilometers using only the equations of a man who died 3 centuries ago. But with Pioneer, Newton was not correct. The number Anderson published that year was 8.74 times 10 to the negative 10 meters per second squared, an anomalous acceleration directed toward the Sun, gently but steadily slowing both Pioneer spacecraft. About 10 billion times smaller than ordinary gravitational acceleration. To give you a sense, it is like a feather falling a few meters less than expected over an entire century. Absurdly small. But it did not change. It did not diminish as the craft flew farther. It could not be explained by any model. It did not disappear upon rechecking, and it was in both spacecraft. A machine with the mass of a motorcycle, billions of kilometers from Earth, was quietly asking whether humanity's physics was correct. This was the first systematic anomaly on a spacecraft that could not be eliminated by ordinary measuring tools. Not a sensor error, not radio noise, not a software bug. Anderson and his team had checked for 18 years. The physics community then checked for many more years. The number remained. Stop for a second and sit with that. All of modern physics, from the GPS satellites above your head, to the trajectory calculations of ships going to Mars, to the three-dimensional map of the galaxy that the Hubble telescope is drawing, all of it rests on Newton's equations, refined by Einstein's relativity. Those are the two pillars, the two most fundamental laws humanity has ever written to describe how the universe moves, and a small machine, built with 1970s technology, billions of kilometers from Earth, was showing that those equations might not be complete. This is where the story is no longer about a spacecraft. If Newton is not complete, then our model of the solar system is not complete. The model of the galaxy is missing a piece. The model of the entire universe may need to be rewritten from the beginning. In the years after the 1998 publication, physicists began proposing hypotheses that 10 years earlier would have been considered insane. Perhaps dark matter, which we still thought existed only at galactic scales, was actually present right inside our solar system, quietly pulling on the Pioneer craft. Perhaps gravity behaves differently at very large distances, a theory called MOND, short for modified Newtonian dynamics, which holds that Newton's formula needs modification in regions of extremely low acceleration. Perhaps Pioneer was sensing extremely low-frequency gravitational waves left over from the Big Bang, the primordial ripples of space-time that no other instrument on Earth was sensitive enough to measure. Many physicists began building entire careers on the possibility that Pioneer was the first sign of new physics. The model of the universe you learned in school, the solar system, gravity, the fundamental laws, may only be approximate. Pioneer was suggesting that we are missing a piece, and that piece may be as large as an entire unwritten chapter of science. But there was also another possibility, more humble yet no less frightening. We did not yet know whether Pioneer was showing us new physics, or showing us that we did not understand our own machine. Before we reach the solution, we need to talk about something that almost happened in 2004, because if that had not happened, if there had not been a scientist obsessed enough to do what no one was paid to do, this story would have ended here. No Block 6, no Block 7. No this video. That person was named Slava Turyshev, a young theoretical physicist at JPL of the same generation as Anderson, but with a different perspective. Anderson was the discoverer. Turyshev was the one who wanted to solve it. After the 1998 paper, Turyshev had a simple but bold idea. If Pioneer 10 and 11 had accidentally discovered an anomaly, why not build a spacecraft designed specifically, a Pioneer 2, to measure it again with precision? A new craft, with modern instruments, sent to great distances, with the sole mission of confirming or refuting the anomaly. If the anomaly was real, we would have new physics. If not, we would close a 30-year mystery. But NASA would not allocate $1 billion for a mission based on speculation. They wanted solid proof the anomaly was real first. And to get that proof, Turyshev needed one thing. He needed the original data from Pioneer 10 and 11, the entire Doppler and telemetry data the craft had sent back over 30 years. Not summaries, not final number tables. He needed the raw data, bit by bit. The moment he began searching, he realized something terrifying. The original data was disappearing. In the 1970s, Pioneer data was stored on punched cards, a technology now extinct, with no machines left that could still read them. In the 1980s, JPL switched to 7-track and 9-track magnetic tapes, something no modern computer could read, something for which only a few specialized readers still existed. By 2004, when Turyshev began searching, most of the tapes had sat in storage for 20 years, slowly decaying in cardboard boxes. Many tapes had been eaten by mold. Some readers had been discarded when IT departments were upgraded. Dead technology. If Turyshev did not act immediately, both the question and the answer would vanish forever along with the machine, so he began a hunt that no one in the field had ever done before. He traveled across the United States. He dug through the computers of retired JPL navigators from the 1970s, finding old digitized files. He contacted the National Space Science Data Center at NASA Goddard in Maryland, requesting every remaining copy. He went to physical archives, opened every box, read every label, and then a fateful discovery occurred. More than a dozen boxes of Pioneer tapes forgotten under a staircase at JPL in moldy cardboard boxes near an area scheduled to be cleared. No one knew they were there. No one had touched them for 20 years. And one of the last remaining tape readers that still worked, the only one in the United States that could read that format, was on its way to the scrap heap. Turyshev rescued it at the last minute. In total, he recovered 43 gigabytes of original Pioneer data. With today's technology, that is the capacity of a small memory card, but to obtain it in 2004 took 4 years and thousands of hours of quiet work. Turyshev later said he remembered many late nights sitting reading navigation data from more than 400 moldy magnetic tapes found under the staircase. He said cleaning the reader took about as long as using it. This was archaeology of the future. A scientist digging up data not yet 30 years old, but already on the verge of being lost forever. While the machine that produced that data was drifting into space, also gradually losing the ability to speak. If Turyshev had not acted, the Pioneer story would have drifted into a second kind of silence. Not the physical silence of the machine, but the silence of knowledge that had lost the ability to be told. But with the 43 gigabytes rescued, the story could continue. Without Turyshev, we would never have known anything more about the Pioneer anomaly. Only, what Turyshev did not foresee was, when he finished reading that pile of data, he would change the entire story, in a way that even he did not desire. Before we reach the solution, we need to talk about something that almost happened in 2004. Because if that had not happened, if there had not been a scientist obsessed enough to do what no one was paid to do, this story would have ended here. No Block 6, no Block 7, no this video. That person was named Slava Turyshev. A young theoretical physicist at JPL of the same generation as Anderson, but with a different perspective. Anderson was the discoverer, Turyshev was the one who wanted to solve it. After the 1998 paper, Turyshev had a simple but bold idea. If Pioneer 10 and 11 had accidentally discovered an anomaly, why not build a spacecraft designed specifically, a Pioneer 2, to measure it again with precision? A new craft with modern instruments, sent to great distances, with the sole mission of confirming or refuting the anomaly. If the anomaly was real, we would have new physics. If not, we would close a 30-year mystery. But NASA would not allocate $1 billion for a mission based on speculation. They wanted solid proof the anomaly was real first. And to get that proof, Turyshev needed one thing. He needed the original data from Pioneer 10 and 11, the entire Doppler and telemetry data the craft had sent back over 30 years. Not summaries, not final number tables. He needed the raw data, bit by bit. The moment he began searching, he realized something terrifying. The original data was disappearing. In the 1970s, Pioneer data was stored on punched cards, a technology now extinct, with no machines left that could still read them. In the 1980s, JPL switched to 7-track and 9-track magnetic tapes, something no modern computer could read, something for which only a few specialized readers still existed. By 2004, when Turyshev began searching, most of the tapes had sat in storage for 20 years, slowly decaying in cardboard boxes. Many tapes had been eaten by mold. Some readers had been discarded when IT departments were upgraded. Dead technology. If Turyshev did not act immediately, both the question and the answer would vanish forever along with the machine. So he began a hunt that no one in the field had ever done before. He traveled across the United States. He dug through the computers of retired JPL navigators from the 1970s, finding old digitized files. He contacted the National Space Science Data Center at NASA Goddard in Maryland, requesting every remaining copy. He went to physical archives, opened every box, read every label, and then a fateful discovery occurred. More than a dozen boxes of Pioneer tapes forgotten under a staircase at JPL in moldy cardboard boxes near an area scheduled to be cleared. No one knew they were there. No one had touched them for 20 years. And one of the last remaining tape readers that still worked, the only one in the United States that could read that format, was on its way to the scrap heap. Turyshev rescued it at the last minute. In total, he recovered 43 gigabytes of original Pioneer data. With today's technology, that is the capacity of a small memory card. But to obtain it in 2004 took 4 years and thousands of hours of quiet work. Turyshev later said he remembered many late nights sitting reading navigation data from more than 400 moldy magnetic tapes found under the staircase. He said cleaning the reader took about as long as using it. This was archaeology of the future. A scientist digging up data not yet 30 years old, but already on the verge of being lost forever. While the machine that produced that data was drifting into space, also gradually losing the ability to speak. If Turyshev had not acted, the Pioneer story would have drifted into a second kind of silence. Not the physical silence of the machine, but the silence of knowledge that had lost the ability to be told. But with the 43 gigabytes rescued, the story could continue. Without Turyshev, we would never have known anything more about the Pioneer anomaly. Only, what Turyshev did not foresee was, when he finished reading that pile of data, he would change the entire story, in a way that even he did not desire. On June 12, 2012, Physical Review Letters published a paper with a clean title, Support for the Thermal Origin of the Pioneer Anomaly. The lead author was Slava Turyshev. Co-authors included Victor Toth, Gary Kinsella and colleagues at JPL. The paper was 12 pages long. It closed one of the most discussed physics mysteries of the late 20th century. 14 years after Anderson's publication, the physics community had spent an entire decade dreaming. There were specialized conferences devoted solely to the pioneer anomaly. There were hundreds of papers proposing new physics hypotheses. There were young physicists who chose pioneer as the subject of their doctoral theses, believing they stood before the door of a revolution, the greatest since Einstein wrote general relativity. There were people who built entire careers on the possibility that pioneer was the first sign of a new physical order. What Turyshev found was not that revolution. After 8 years reading 43 gigabytes of data, after thousands of hours of thermal simulations on computers, after reconstructing every technical detail of the machine from the original 1970s design drawings, Turyshev had found the answer. It was right on the craft. Each pioneer carried 4 radioisotope thermoelectric generators, called RTGs for short, using plutonium-238 to produce electricity through heat from radioactive decay. These 4 RTGs emitted a total of about 2,500 watts of waste heat per craft, a huge amount of heat compared to the final 4 watts of electrical power. That heat had to go somewhere, and it did not go equally in every direction. The large dish antenna pointed toward the rear of the craft, toward Earth, to send the signal. That meant the rear face of the craft was shielded, while the front face, pointing into space, could radiate heat more freely. The thermal asymmetry created a slight push force directed backward, that is, toward the rear, that is, toward the sun. Only 63 watts of asymmetric heat was enough to produce an acceleration of 8.7 times 10 to the negative 10 meters per second squared. Exactly the number Anderson had measured. Turyshev called this phenomenon thermal recoil force, the recoil force due to heat. He told the press that year, "This effect is like when you drive a car and the photons from the headlights push you backward. Very subtle." And then he said something else, a sentence of entirely different weight. "The story is coming to an end because it turns out standard physics still wins. Of course it would have been very interesting to discover new physics, but we have solved a mystery. Not dark matter, not modified gravity, not gravitational waves, just heat." This is where the story has a layer of tragedy that very few articles write about, because Turyshev himself had hoped the anomaly was real. He had begun the data rescue in 2004 not to close the mystery, but to open the way for Pioneer 2. He had spent 8 years of his life, traveled across the United States, read 400 moldy tapes, only to prove the anomaly real enough that NASA would have to give him a new spacecraft. By solving the mystery with heat, he had buried that dream himself. No Pioneer 2, no longer needed. He had won the scientific problem and lost his own personal aspiration. Imagine the moment he read his own paper published in Physical Review letters. Reputation just unlocked. A door he had spent 8 years opening had just closed, at the same time, by the same act. And that was not only one person's tragedy. 14 years of hypotheses, hundreds of papers, dozens of careers built on the hope that Pioneer was the first sign, all became superfluous overnight. What the community had invested in most, the hope for new physics, had been extinguished by the very person who wanted it to be real the most. For most of the scientific community, the story closed in 2012, but there was one person who did not agree. But there is a detail that Turyshev's paper does not say. The machine had died before the paper was published. 9 years before Physical Review letters announced the solution, Pioneer 10 had fallen silent. Turyshev was writing about a machine that no one could ask again. He solved a mystery of a witness who had already gone. In 1997, the official Pioneer 10 mission was closed by NASA, not because the craft had failed, but because of budget. After 25 years of flight, Pioneer 10 was considered too old, too far, of too little scientific value to continue. The operations team was disbanded, but the machine did not know that. It kept talking. On March 3, 2002, exactly the 30th anniversary of launch day, the DSN conducted a special listening session to celebrate the machine's birthday. That was the last successful signal reception. On April 27, 2002, Pioneer 10 sent complete telemetry for the last time. After that, everything declined rapidly. By the end of 2002, voltage was down to 0.94 volts. The plutonium-238 in the 4 RTGs was decaying to the threshold of insufficiency. On the night of January 22nd into the 23rd, 2003, the 70-meter dish of the Deep Space Network in Madrid was pointed precisely at a point in the sky 12 billion kilometers from Earth. One of the 3 largest dishes on the planet listened for an 8-watt transmitter older than many of the engineers on duty. The signal took 11 hours and 20 minutes to travel from where the machine was drifting to Madrid, and the signal arrived, very weak, only the carrier wave. No telemetry, just a final radio breath from a machine shutting down. Pioneer 10 was speaking for the last time. 2 weeks later, on February 7th, 2003, the controllers called again. Nothing, only the cold hiss of background noise. But the machine was not dead. The plutonium was not completely spent. Pioneer 10 was still drifting. The circuits were still running. The sensors were still sensing. It simply no longer had enough power to push a coherent signal home. It was still there. It just could no longer speak. From March 3rd to 5th, 2006, the DSN made a final effort. 3 consecutive days of listening, 3 dishes on 3 continents, nothing. NASA closed the log. Right now, in 2026, Pioneer 10 is still moving. More than 140 times the distance from Earth to the Sun, away from the Sun, flying at 12 kilometers per second, heading toward Aldebaran, the red giant star in the constellation Taurus. It will take about 2 million years to reach the vicinity of Aldebaran. By then, Aldebaran itself will have moved from its present position. The machine is flying to an appointment with a star that, by the time it arrives, will already be gone. But there is something on Pioneer 10 that is still flying with it. Something that will outlast the machine, outlast any building humanity has ever built, outlast anything we call civilization. Attached to one of the antenna struts of Pioneer 10 is a gold anodized aluminum plaque, 6 by 9 inches, smaller than an A5 sheet of paper. It is called the Pioneer Plaque. It was designed by Carl Sagan and Frank Drake, 2 of the most famous astronomers of the 20th century. It was engraved by hand by Linda Salzman Sagan, Carl Sagan's wife, an artist. 5 years before the Voyager Golden Record, there was the Pioneer Plaque, humanity's first draft sent to the universe. On that plaque they engraved 5 things: the figures of 2 naked humans, 1 male, 1 female, the male's hand raised in a greeting gesture, the simplest symbol of peace that any conscious being could recognize. The diagram of the hydrogen atom, the most abundant element in the universe, used as a common language with anyone who might find it. The pulsar map, Earth's position drawn relative to 14 known pulsars, like a cosmic address, so the recipient would know where we came from. The silhouette of Pioneer 10 itself behind the 2 figures to show the scale, and the diagram of the solar system with the craft's trajectory like a trail drawn backward from the destination to the origin. It has no music like the Voyager Golden Record, no children's laughter, no sound of rain falling on leaves, no Bach or Chuck Berry, only images, because this was the first test of an idea no one had ever tried. What can humans say to the universe that the universe might understand? In 2 million years, when Pioneer 10 approaches Aldebaran, every city on Earth we have ever built will have been erased by time. Every language we speak will be dead. All the animals we know by name may be extinct. Even humanity, in the form we exist today, may no longer be. But the gold plaque will still be there, still engraved with 2 human figures raising a hand in greeting to a universe we hope has someone in it. That is the first greeting humanity ever sent beyond the solar system. And it flies on a machine that has died. A machine that ran on less power than an alarm clock when it was alive. Now back to the science. Because there is a detail that Turyshev's paper, and every paper about it, usually does not emphasize. John Anderson, the discoverer of the Pioneer anomaly 30 years earlier, never accepted Turyshev's thermal solution. Not for a single day. This is the man who waited nearly 2 decades just to be certain the anomaly was real before daring to publish. This is the man who spent another 14 years after the 1998 paper defending it, and when Turyshev offered the solution in 2012, Anderson did not agree. He died in 2023 still skeptical. So we have 2 opposing hypotheses. Turyshev's hypothesis, asymmetric thermal radiation from the RTGs, is enough to explain everything. Case closed. Standard physics wins. Anderson's hypothesis and that of the skeptics. Turyshev's model has something that no good physical model is allowed to have, the luxury of knowing the correct answer in advance before setting the parameters. Turyshev did not predict the number 8.74 times 10 to the negative 10 from first principles. He built a detailed thermal model, then adjusted the parameters until they matched the number Anderson had measured. That is not predictive physics. That is reverse-tuned physics. There are 3 problems the 2012 paper did not resolve conclusively. First, Pioneer 11 had an anomaly of similar magnitude, but its detailed behavior in the first 5 years differed from Pioneer 10. Turyshev did not analyze this case. Second, both craft showed anomalous spin down that thermal radiation does not predict. Third, similar anomalies also appeared in Ulysses and Galileo, 2 craft with completely different thermal designs from Pioneer. If heat is enough for Pioneer, why does it appear in Ulysses? Turyshev had no answer, but there is a problem larger than all of them. The only way to test the thermal solution again is to have more data from Pioneer itself. But Pioneer 10 has been silent since 2003, Pioneer 11 has been silent since 1995. There is no way to get another bite. And there is no Pioneer 3. No mission has been proposed to test it again. Even the physics community has turned its back and moved on to other mysteries. This means something few dare to say out loud. The Pioneer mystery was not solved the way science usually solves mysteries. It was solved by running out of opponents. The opponent had died before it could argue further. 3 silences have closed this story. The first silence is the silence of the machine. Pioneer 10 can no longer speak. The Deep Space Network listening stations no longer try to call. The dish in Madrid has been pointed to other missions. The dishes in California and Australia are listening to Voyager, tracking Perseverance on Mars, waiting for signals from New Horizons in the Kuiper Belt. No one is listening to Pioneer anymore. The space between Earth and the machine is now only a distance through which no signal flies. The second silence is the silence of the physics community. After Turyshev's paper in 2012, the number of papers on the Pioneer anomaly dropped sharply almost overnight. It no longer appeared at major conferences. It was no longer an open problem in physics textbooks. Critical papers still appeared sporadically in 2013, 2014, 2017, raising exactly the issues Anderson and other skeptics had pointed out, but no one read them. No one cited them. They vanished into the sea of scientific papers no one notices. The community chose Turyshev's story and closed the book. The third silence is the silence of the discoverer. John Anderson died in 2023 at the age of 89. He took with him the skepticism he did not live to prove. He took with him 43 years of studying a tiny number that he believed, until his last breath still hid something larger than heat. No one from the original research team is still alive to continue the argument. The machine has gone. The community has moved on. The discoverer has departed. Pioneer 10 is still drifting through the darkness. No one is tracking it. No one is waiting, carrying an unanswered greeting and a question that no one on Earth still has the motivation to ask again. The journey that began on March 2nd, 1972 will continue, with no one waiting for a signal, no one knowing the answer. This is what I want you to take away from all of this. Right now, a machine designed for a 21-month mission lived 31 years and then fell silent for another 23 years, and it is still carrying a question that humanity has not dared to say is closed. Some science stories end with an answer. The Pioneer story ends with the exhaustion of the ability to keep asking. We have built larger ships. We have built more powerful ships. We have far more sophisticated instruments, but none of them held a mystery as long as Pioneer held it. None of them flew far enough. Sometimes science does not win by proving. It wins by the absence of an opponent, and when the opponent is absent because it has died, the mystery is not truly solved. It is only allowed to sleep. There are questions about the universe that a machine must die before they can be fully asked. Pioneer is that question, not from telescopes on the ground, not from satellites in Earth orbit, not from any spacecraft we have today. We had only one messenger that flew far enough, and that messenger can no longer speak, farther than any artificial object in history, faster than any rocket humanity can launch today. A gold plaque engraved with an unanswered message, a question with no one to answer it. One machine, 30 years of mystery, a question no one has dared to say is closed. Has the Pioneer mystery been solved, or has it been abandoned? The answer is probably flying somewhere beyond the solar system, on a machine that can no longer tell us. Out there, right now, as you read these lines, the machine is still drifting. No one is listening, but the question is still flying. If this kind of story is what you came here to find, subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because in the next video we will go deeper into the regions of science that have not yet dared to name themselves, where the answers do not arrive when we want them, and the questions keep flying even after those who once asked them have gone. Leave a comment with what surprised you most in this video. It may be exactly the details someone else needs to read to understand that science does not always end in victory. And if this story has touched you, if you feel there is something lying silent beneath the numbers and the decades that you do not want to let die one more time, share it with someone. Because sometimes the only way a mystery does not truly die is for someone to keep telling it. Even when the machine has fallen silent. Even when the community has moved on. Even when the discoverer has gone.